Hi, good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the Berea College Convocation. I am Mary Robert Garrett. I teach organic chemistry here at Berea College, and I am so excited to introduce you to our speaker this evening. Dr. Rosalie Richards is an associate provost and professor of chemistry and education at Stetson University, with research interests in porphyrin chemistry, which are these big rings with carbon, nitrogen, and hydrogen, as well as equity in higher education. She has directed numerous award-winning undergraduate research, senior theses, and high school student research projects, garnering over $10 million in grants to advance STEM education. She serves frequently as Institute Facilitator for the Council on Undergraduate Research and as a consultant to colleges and universities on high impact educational practices and faculty and organizational development. Prior to her position at Stetson University, Dr. Richards was the first Kaolin Endowed Chair in Science Education in Georgia Eminent Scholar and Professor of Chemistry at Georgia College and State University, where she led the institutionalizing their undergraduate research initiative, which elevated the practice and impact of mentored student research. Today, we are excited that she's joining us virtually for the annual Science Convocation, where she is thrilled to catalyze a conversation around the topic of why STEM matters. Please join me in thanking Dr. Rosalie Richards.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I really am thrilled to have had an opportunity to be invited to speak to you tonight. I am a faculty member at Stetson University first, a mom and a wife as well, and I hope tonight I'll have an opportunity to speak with you a little bit about why I think STEM matters and to invite a robust conversation after my talk. So I'm going to share my screen now. Before I get started, I really would like to thank a few people who made it possible for me to be here. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Thomas Ahrens, who helped to facilitate this time, Dr. Mary Roberts for her wonderful warm invitation, her wonderful warm introduction, Mackenzie Carter and Kyle Wooten, who are in the background helping us. And then many, many thanks to you, the students, staff, and faculty at Berea College, especially at this time when we are not only distancing socially, but there's so much disruption going on in your state and in your areas. And last but not least, President Lyle Roloffs for hosting this event. What I'm showing you here are the two campuses of Stetson University in Florida. The campus image on the left is my view of what we call the Palm Court. And this was done about 10 years ago when our then new president, the first female president at Stetson University, joined us for about her 10-year tenure. And she has just retired recently, and I know we're going to miss her significantly. The image on the right is our law campus, and that facility is located in the Tampa area. And so I really enjoy both campuses. They're really sunny and bright, and every day really truly is like living in paradise. So before I get started, I'd like to give you a little bit of history of me. I call this my periodic table of states. And as you can hear, I have an accent. So I left and went to, I'm from Antigua, which is this image right here, AG Silver on the periodic table. And then when I was done with my undergraduate, with my high school studies, I actually went to the University of the Virgin Islands, which is this V right here. and then finished my undergraduate in chemistry and physics. And I was invited at that time to go to Chicago, which is Carbon C right here, to do my master's degree and then move on to my doctoral work. But Chicago was so cold coming from the Caribbean that I left and fled to California, which is CA right here. Spent 6 glorious years in Los Angeles at the University of Southern Cal. Go Trojans. And then once I was done, I was talking with someone via what was called electronic mail at that time, email. And I was invited to head over to Georgia, which is Gallium here, to start my, my career. And so I spent quite a number of years at Spelman College, working in the chemistry department as the first model institutions for excellent scholar teacher, which is like, it's like a internship for new faculty. And then I got invited to Middle Georgia to found a Center for Science and STEM Education, which is where I spent most of my career. And then more recently, I moved to Florida, which is F. Florine. And this is where I've been since 2014. So that's a little bit about my professional career. I'm actually from a really, really tiny island in the Caribbean known as Antigua. And you'll see here the arrow, that's the pin that's over Antigua. This is an image of a beautiful part of my island. Antigua has 365 beaches, which we say is a beach for every year. The island is so small that the word Antigua is probably covered right here. So I try to get back home as often as possible, but with the pandemic, that's been difficult. This is my family, my husband, James, my 2 children. Bronte graduated from Stetson University in 2019, and she sort of works for Disney because she's furloughed right now, and they're sort of waiting for what's going on. And then my son, Byron, and our bunny, Bunny, Bun Bun, who thinks he's a dog, so he hangs out with us often. He likes to watch TV and eat popcorn. And then this is close to my house. This is the beach that I try to go to in the mornings to run. It's at Dickinson Bay. It's called Anna's. And then there's a little area here that you can sit. The reason that I show this particular image is because I want you to keep this image in mind, because before we begin, I usually try to engage a contemplative exercise, especially in my classes, because we come to this space with all sorts of worries, all sorts of anxieties, all sorts of things that we're thinking we could be doing right now at this time. And I'd like us to stop for one moment and center while we engage in this particular exercise. So if you would, please close your eyes. And I'd like you to imagine a clock on the wall across from you. It has a white face and black numbers on it. And you can see the minute hand going around rapidly. And as you inhale, imagine that the minute hand is spinning only half as fast. And as you exhale, see the minute hand slowing to a crawl. And as you inhale, see the minute hand come to a complete stop. And as you exhale, imagine that the minute hand slowly disappears so that only the hour hand remains. And as you inhale, the hour hand also disappears, leaving only the numbers on the face of the clock. And as you exhale, the numbers fade away too, leaving only the blank face of the clock, which now disappears from the wall. And as you inhale, you stare at the wall and it begins to slowly dissolve. And as you exhale, you see a blue sky ahead of you and you find yourself standing on that beach. And as you inhale, You're staring at the sky and the ocean. Sky and the ocean are the same color. And as you exhale, you find that you cannot tell the sky and the ocean apart. And as you inhale, you feel the warm sand under your bare feet. And as you exhale, you hear the sound of waves crashing on the shore. And as you inhale, the air smells salty. And as you exhale, you begin walking down the shoreline where you see the tide receding. And as you inhale, you see seashells on the left that are left on the sand. And as you exhale, you see each shell has a number that used to be on that clock. And as you inhale, you bend over to pick up a shell. And as you exhale, the cool salt water cascades around your feet. And as you inhale, the wave rushes in to cover each one of the shells in the sand. And as you exhale, you sit down on the warm sand and wrap your arms around your knees. And as you inhale, you feel your shoulders sinking. And as you exhale, you see a small sailboat passing by and you wave at the sailor. And as you inhale, you can hear seagulls at the far ends of the beach. And as you exhale, you feel the sun's warmth wash over your face. And as you inhale, you look at the color of the ocean. And as you exhale, you look up at the color of the sky. And as you inhale, can you see the horizon? And as you exhale, you smell the salty air. And as you inhale, there's that sailboat again, slowly fading in the distance. And as you exhale, a few stray clouds float and flirt with the sky. And as you inhale, feel your shoulders slowly lowering. And as you exhale, the sun begins receding. And as you inhale, the sky finally succumbs to yellow and orange trails. And as you exhale, you close your eyes to feel the cool breezes tickle your eyelids. And as you inhale, you can hear the waves move in and out. And as you exhale, the seagulls finally quiet. And as you inhale, it's only you and the sky. And as you exhale, feel your shoulders slowly sinking. And as you inhale, you open your eyes and stare at what is left of the horizon. Now take a deep breath and open your eyes. Thank you for indulging me in that contemplative exercise. We do a number of these during our courses, as I mentioned before, and they're lovely ways for us to get centered and get going with what we want to learn today. So thank you again. The target audience for this particular presentation are students. So students, I'll be speaking to you tonight. So here's an overview of our presentation. What is STEM anyway, and why is it a thing? And what makes STEM happen? How does it happen? Is it a creative process? Is it a human process? And who gets to participate in STEM, how it works? And then I'll talk a little bit at the beginning about why STEM matters. I have 3 thoughts. STEM is a system for exploring and for innovation. And so the questions before about whether STEM is a human process or a creative process is one that we'll talk about as we explore innovation. STEM is also an engine of prosperity, and we won't spend a lot of time on this particular topic, but I want to just leave with you something that you probably already know, that most, if not every innovation has its roots in STEM education. And then finally, STEM is important to humanity's future well-being. And this is something that we're actually seeing right now as we're going through the coronavirus pandemic. So here is a nice image of what we mean when we say STEM. STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And there are different schools of thought about what STEM is. And as you see in this Venn diagram, engineering somehow falls in the middle of these three. There are others who would argue that they're just 4 areas and engineering is another one of those areas. But one school of thought is that the integration and intimacy that occurs between science, mathematics, and technology fuel engineering, which is an applied art of those. And so the words, the languages of STEM are particularly interesting to me because each one of these areas, disciplines, has its own language. And oftentimes people go, duh, I don't know what you're saying when you're speaking mathematical language or technology language or engineering language or science language. And the thing that I find quite humorous about this is that it's similar to any of the other areas and other disciplines. For example, the language of music is very different. Most people who are musicians start very early with the alphabet of music, everything from what is a treble clef or bass clef, what those notes are that are between those lines or on a line. That particular language you have to learn very early, such that when you put the letters together, you get the alphabet, which would then look like in the music world, a piece of music, and paragraphs, which then become symphonies and so on and so forth. And so similarly in mathematics, engineering, technology, and math, we have our alphabets that we then put together, string together as words that then allow us to be able to do the types of innovations that people use every day. For example, our cell phones that we don't seem to be able to do without. The word STEM is an acronym, as you know, and we didn't call it STEM all the time. We used to call it SMET, which sounds really, really bad. Actually, the Assistant Director of Education and Human Resources at the National Science Foundation, which is the largest funding agency in the physical and social sciences in the United States, she pushed for the word STEM versus the word SMET because she thought SMET didn't sound really good. And so now we have a nice acronym that we're using and people are adding to that acronym. So you hear about things like STEAM, where the arts and the humanities are integrating their disciplines with STEM. Something that has happened all the time, but something that we're formalizing more with these acronyms. And the reason that STEM is a thing has a lot to do with 2 different major things that happened in the early 2000s. First of all, there was a seminal report that was put out by the National Academies of Sciences called Rising Above the Gathering Storm. And that report really was a strong urging by the national academies for us to invest significantly in increasing the number of scientists, engineers, mathematicians, and technologists through the pipeline of education so that the United States could become more competitive and, as a result, what we talked about before, a profitable, resourceful country. Because when you think about resources, innovation, and well-being, that has a lot to do with funding and money. And a lot of times we talk about this from the perspective of how people feel. But if you really look at the breadcrumbs of what that feeling issue is, it has a lot to do with what resources people have to use and then how those resources manifest themselves anywhere from issues of poverty to issues associated with crimes of poverty, and so on and so forth. So well-being in this case extends well beyond just how you feel. And so a lot of the outcomes, a lot of outcomes from this particular piece of work, that report, Rising Above the Gathering Storm, manifested themselves into new pots of funding or rearticulated funding from the federal government in order to really start investing significantly and intentionally in funding the STEM pipeline. The second piece of important work that happened to make STEM a thing is the TIMSS exam outcomes. And TIMSS is an acronym, I'm going to forget it now, but it's the third international exam that's associated with mathematics and science. And I'll remember the acronym in a minute. But what this exam showed was that across the globe, the United States was sitting very close to the bottom when it came to, I think it was third graders who were, it might not have been, it might have been middle schoolers, excuse me, who were participating in STEM and how they were passing or not passing this particular exam. And so a little bit of that was embarrassment on behalf of our country. And so a lot of it had to make itself into the investment pipeline, such that we were really thinking much more strategically about how we were investing our citizenry in order to facilitate a much more strategic approach to STEM. The last time that happened was in the 1950s, when we were calling it a race in space, a space race. And the Russians landed on the moon. And so that became a big issue. Not landed on the moon, sent a shuttle up to the moon, and that became an issue. And so, you know, a lot of money was pumped into science and technology, engineering and mathematics at that time as well. And so part of the conversation that I do want to have with you is this issue of whether or not STEM is political. And so I show you the Venn diagram of STEM and another Venn diagram that looks at economy, culture, politics, and our society in general. And without belaboring this too much, one of the things that I want to share is that as long as you have people involved, things are going to be political. And so I spend a lot of time looking at social media and working with students on a number of different things. And I see a lot of people arguing about whether or not people are bringing things in that are political. It's okay to be political. I'm not sure why that's not something that's encouraged, but certainly every time we make decisions for our areas, for our regions, for our locales and so on, it becomes political because we have people involved. And so one of the things that we're gonna look at, for those of you who are not familiar with how STEM works, is why STEM is a political enterprise. The second thing that I want to mention here about politics and STEM has a lot to do with what we see unfolding right now as we are working our way through the coronavirus pandemic. We see engagements of political offices. So for example, at your own local level, the governors and the government areas have to make decisions about how the community is supposed to engage as it deals with a viral material. And so STEM includes science. The science of virology of coronavirus is a real thing. And so the engagement of our politicians with that thing in making us either wear masks or not wear masks or demand different kinds of behaviors is a political issue. And STEM has ramifications there. So STEM is political. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. The other thing about STEM in terms of whether STEM is political or not is that scientists, engineers, technologists and mathematicians are about seeking truth. And so I use the word apodeictic there. There are a couple of different derivatives to that name. That word apodeictic is another one. The definition of it being the certain truth. And so one of the things that we do when we're chasing STEM is we're actually chasing what is the truth. Now, they're truths, and we're sort of in this interesting phase in our politic right now where the question of truth is being questioned. So what is true, how true is true, and so on. And so people who are engaged in STEM are also mostly engaged in seeking certain truths. And we can talk about that after during our question and answer. So how does STEM happen? I'll give you the two different scenarios, but then in our discussion, we can also talk about the politic associated with it. So there are two big granting agencies in the United States. One is the National Institutes of Health, and they focus mostly on biological and anything that's associated with life. And then the other is the National Science Foundation, and that particular federal organization focuses mostly on the physical sciences, so physics, chemistry, focuses on biology and the social sciences, so a little bit of psychology and some sociology. Both of these granting agencies get their funding from the federal government, and so every year I used to watch C-SPAN, especially if I wanted to go to sleep. But one of the areas that they spend a lot of time on is they spend time arguing about how much money the federal government is going to put out in order to ensure that we have resources for people to fund their STEM ideas. And so in the case of the National Institutes of Health, an investigator has an idea. That person, on behalf of their institution, usually a university or some organization, submits an application. There's what's called a peer review process where people who are in the field or close to the field or associated with the kinds of work or work at the edges of what these investigators do, they come together, they read proposals, and then the National Institutes of Health allocate funding to the individuals or not if the proposal is not found meritorious of funding, or if there's not enough funding to go around, and so on and so forth. So that particular cycle you often see in others. The National Science Foundation does the same thing, right? So there's a call for proposals around certain things. You might be looking at a call for proposals on designing particular types of techniques or chasing a particular volcanic eruption that might have gone on, and so on and so forth. And people submit applications for that. And it's a pretty rigorous process, and I've been involved in several of these reviews over the years, to the point now where I'm trying to pass those reviews on to the younger generation. And so is STEM political when it comes to this? Of course it is, because despite the peer review process, there are other types of decisions that need to be made once the group who is the panel of experts who are making these decisions about who is meritorious for funding or not. And so I'll give you one example. I was on a panel where we absolutely said no to a particular proposal. This proposal was for a state that was interested in increasing the number of wind turbines associated with renewable energy, and they were going to do all of these wonderful engineering things in certain communities and so on and so forth. And then they were going to educate teachers, and they were going to take engineers and turn them into teachers, and so on and so forth. The proposal as we saw it was not meritorious for funding. So the panel wrote a brief that said no to funding, and the proposal got funded anyway. Why would I say that this is political? One, because it involves people. Number two, there are other factors that the National Science Foundation uses when they're evaluating whether or not a particular proposal is meritorious for funding beyond what the panel of experts has agency to do. And so when I saw that it got funding, of course I queried it because that's who I am. And I don't know that I got a major response. I think there's some kind of canned response that goes out to panelists and so on. And so you get to see how decision-making happens outside of areas of expertise, which is how STEM happens. STEM typically happens because funding is available. Sometimes STEM happens because a particular congressman may be pushing for a particular kind of agency in his or her constituencies. That happens as well. I've been on panels where these things go on. And so, you know, STEM does become political, and I don't know, unless we get rid of people, that STEM will not be a political endeavor. I wanted to talk about STEM as also invention, because it's not, STEM just doesn't happen, as you know, because of the kind of funding. And so as students, you often hear of areas where people dropped out of school and they went and opened their garage and had friends over, and they created companies and so on and so forth. I'm not going to give any sexy examples associated with that because there's several out there. I want to talk specifically about Dr. Percy Julian, and I'm going to be focusing on more marginalized groups of people who are not as well known in STEM, or if they're known for specific things. So Dr. Percy Julian is known as was known as an inventor. He is known for contributing significantly to increasing the throughput, or the amount of progesterone that is synthesized today from plant materials. He's also known for designing the precursors, which are the materials before the material cortisone. And we use cortisone for all sorts of things, hydrocortisones as a steroidal cream, and cortisones for steroid use, which is really important in inflammation. Progesterone, as we know, is important for regulation of ovulation. And so for those of you who are familiar with the birth control pills, progesterone is a large component in that area. And that's a nice picture of Dr. Percy Julian in one of the laboratories, likely in Atlanta. This is a really, really busy slide, but I put it there. It's a really short life of Dr. Julian, a professional life, because I wanted to demonstrate how someone who was born in 1899 in the segregated South could have risen to such prominence when it comes to STEM. So he was the first to graduate from DePaul University, first in class, and went on to earn his master's degree at Harvard University in 1923, which is something that was unheard of in segregated USA at that time. Went on and got a PhD from the University of Vienna, which is where he started his work with plants, and was successful in designing a synthetic compound which led to the development of a glaucoma drug. At that time, he also married his wife, who in fact was the first African-American woman to earn a PhD in sociology in the US. Started working with Glidden Company, which is most of you may know as a paint company. And there was something serendipitous that happened that allowed, I think there was a drum that was put outside and a little bit of water got in, and there was some soybean protein in that particular drum. And that soybean protein with the water and the heat then transformed into a couple of different types of compounds that were used to not only save thousands of lives of World War II soldiers, but also a precursor to progesterone. He got several medals and was also recognized for the development of compound S, which I told you was a major ingredient in designing low-cost cortisone. And as you go down this list, you'll see that he actually designed and developed his own company, sold it for a few million, and was elected to the National Academies of Sciences, which is the top scientific academy of notoriety for scientists in our country. The thing that I find absolutely fascinating, though, is that later on he was commemorated by the issuance of a stamp in his honor. And I still have one of these stamps in my, one of my laboratory notebooks in commemoration of Dr. Julian. There's a PBS Nova show called Forgotten Genius that you might be interested in. And it speaks about Dr. Julian and the fact that he overcame racial discrimination and emerged as one of the most influential scientists of the 21st century. And people still today think that if he was not a man of color, he would have won a Nobel Prize. So is science political? Yes, because discrimination comes into science, and a lot of what happens in terms of how science is funded is based on what the microcosm is dealing with. And in the segregated United States at that particular time, some people would or would not get funding for science depending on who they are and the color of their skin, or if they were female. And so let's just look at why does this matter? This matters because as you're thinking about the students, as you students are thinking about how you can influence or who you can influence in terms of becoming science, and we'll look a little bit at that in a minute, it's really important to ensure that stereotypes are not part of the discussion when we're thinking about science and who can become scientists, engineers, mathematicians, or technologists. I'll just run through a little bit of the kind of research that I do with undergraduates and high school students. We look at photodynamic therapy, which is a particular type of approach to using low energy light to kill cancer cells. We use very low energy light to do that. And we use porphyrins, which are these beautiful compounds here. The porphyrin that you know of is hemoglobin. And I don't know if any of you out there are doing porphyrin chemistry. If you, I would love to talk with you. There are very few of us doing that kind of work now. A lot of it started in Russia and has made its way across the globe. So the heme in hemoglobin, the thing that makes blood red is because of this beautiful compound that contains an iron ion in the center. And then the thing that makes, the compound that makes chlorophyll green is a porphyrin-like compound, and you see that it has magnesium in the center. And so one of our interests is in being able to shift this band that you get when you do spectroscopy of the porphyrin. That is when you shine light into the porphyrin, the light that's being absorbed absorbs at around 400 nanometers, which is the wavelength of light that it absorbs. And we want to shift it to longer wavelength, to more red types of light so that it can absorb light when it's in the system and intercalating with cells that have DNA, activate a different type of process that gets to nick the DNA. And so my high school students during the summertime, they make these particular compounds by mixing two materials in the presence of argon, and they they're able to make these compounds. You know when you get the compound because the lab is usually dirty when somebody doesn't clean up. But the idea is that we're trying to move from a purple compound to a green compound. And I said to you that we're trying to make compounds that are that have higher wavelengths. So in this case of this particular slide, you'll see that we're going from 423, we're trying to get towards 600, up to 457. Now we're moving to 497, and we're hoping to move a little further to the right. So scientific and other STEM research, it matters because this particular kind of research that's being done, not just by my lab, but by many other laboratories, is the second generation type of materials that are associated with getting rid of cancer cells that does not use very intense light as is being used now, which is in radiative therapies, and certainly does not use very caustic materials like cisplatin, which uses platinum complexes that then score through the body and just kills everything. The materials that we are using here are hemoglobin, are compounds that you find, derivatives of compounds that you find in the body, in hemoglobin, so the body would recognize them, and then the body can get rid of them as well, in using the same pathway that it does with iron and heme molecules as they go through the process of dying. So I wanted to talk a little bit now about invention, as well as something that's most important to us right now, which is the area of virology. And I'm sorry, I'm moving too quickly. But in 1952, Rosalind Franklin took a photograph of an X-ray photograph that's called photograph 51. It's a famous photograph that captured what's called an X-ray diffraction pattern of DNA. And in capturing that pattern, she became the first person to take an image of crystallized DNA. And you may know a lot about this particular story. Dr. Franklin was a chemist and an X-ray crystallographer. And so what she did is she purified DNA, stretched it into fibers, and then let X-ray beams blast through it. Wherever atoms were located, the X-ray light would diffract. You would capture this image on a film, and I've seen this happen because I'm old enough to have been a graduate student when we're still capturing X-ray diffraction on this kind, using this kind of process on film. And then you use that process to do something almost like a dot to dot, because you're connecting where atoms are located, and then you use that to help you determine the structure. So this is photograph 51 on the top right, and that's the image that James Watson and Francis Crick used to determine the double helix structure of DNA, because they were studying DNA at the same time. And so they then went ahead and quickly published a paper in Nature that announced their discovery of the helical structure, because they were looking at this particular pattern and thought the only way that this pattern could show up is if it was this type of helical structure. Franklin died of ovarian cancer a few years later, and then a few years after that, Watson, Crick, and Wilkins were awarded the Nobel Prize for their discoveries of the molecular structure of DNA. And that was a really, really huge deal. Dr. Franklin also studied the structure of the tobacco mosaic virus, and this virus causes a lot of damage. As you see, it creates a mosaic on tobacco plants, which, as we know, is a major economic driver in certain states. And what she was able to confirm when she did her spectroscopic work is that the viral proteins, in this case RNA, wrap themselves around wrap themselves as tubes around particular kinds of proteins in the viral material, which viruses are dead, so they're not alive, and cause this kind of damage to the tobacco plant. So this is 2020, and it's exactly 100 years after Rosalind Franklin was born. And Nature in July, this past July, wrote an editorial that it was because of Franklin and her collaborators and successors that today we're able to use tools such as DNA sequencing and X-ray crystallography in order to investigate viruses such as SARS-CoV-2, which is our current coronavirus that's shut us down and caused this interesting and disruptive pandemic. And so I wanted to raise this issue of Dr. Franklin because STEM and gender have been intimately intertwined for a very long time. So when we're asking the question of why STEM matters because in terms of the agency that was given to women, especially in the early part of the 20th century, a lot of women were marginalized significantly. And there's evidence to suggest that Dr. Franklin's information was shared with Dr. Watson by Wilkins without her permission. And in the STEM disciplines, the person who publishes first is the person who has access to that information. And so in Watson's personal account, he talks scathingly and most people say very misogynistically about Dr. Franklin. And unfortunately, what then became part of the history of DNA is that Dr. Franklin is best known now for missing out on her share of the Nobel Prize, which is unfortunate because her contributions have been significant, and had it not been for her work, we would not be where we are today, understanding how the coronavirus works. Mary, you giving me time?
I am. I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that there's plenty of time for people to ask questions. Is that okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so this would be a great time. First, I wanted to thank Dr. Richards for bringing Percy Julian, and I've shared that NOVA video with my students a number of times. But I want to open up the floor to people who have questions. And just to let you know that I am sure that Dr. Richards from a previous conversation is happy to talk more about the is STEM political if you don't feel comfortable tapping into the specifics of the science. So feel free to take from either category there or blend it together if you'd like.
Absolutely.
Give people a few minutes here. Okay, yes, so to ask questions, if you can submit them to the Q&A, and I will read those. Okay, so we do have a question, Dr. Richards. The question is, what is the biggest political issue for STEM right now?
Woo! Well, you know, since we already started talking about this, at one point, if we think sort of about the history of STEM, at one point, the answer to that question might have been the space race, right? So back in the 1950s, when the Russians went to space first, the United States was really concerned that we were being scooped, and put a lot of resources into pushing NASA to do the kinds of work it's supposed to do. From a political perspective, the rhetoric that we see is has to do with the role of evidence in understanding how things happen in STEM. And this is not new. This has been a long-standing issue in a lot of my own classes. When students are saying things like, I believe this and I believe that, you know, my response is, this is not a religious class. This is a class where we are dealing with, I'm going to take my think about STEM and what might be one of the most, I think the question was, what is the most political issue in STEM right now? I would say that what it is the erosion of the role of evidence in STEM. And so you see it manifesting itself in words like fake news and again, this is not being ascribed to any political party, because this has been going on for a very, very long time. In fact, I call that word gossip, right? So if we don't have evidence to support what we're saying, we're using gossip. How does this manifest itself? It manifests itself in everything from climate change to the kind of things that we see going on with respect to how the coronavirus is spreading. There are many, many papers that speak to how highly contagious COVID-19 is. And I can tell you for a fact that that's true, because I've had to recover from it myself. And so, and I still don't know how or where or why, because the only thing we do is go to the supermarket. And so when people say, no, you don't wear a mask, or, you know, that's not true, we're just making things up, I can attest to the fact that that's not the case. And there's enough evidence to that end. It's a really important question. I can talk about it forever. So thank you for asking.
Good, we've got a few more. Let's see. Have you ever faced discrimination in STEM?
Oh, yes. Yep. Absolutely. I mean, I have many, many horror stories. So I have like 4 whammies, right? Like I'm not from this country, so there's xenophobia. I am a female, and so there's misogyny. I am a chemist, and that is a discipline that had historically been, I'm going to take my camera off, overwhelmingly a male discipline as well. And then I'm short, right? And so, you know, when I have to reach up to get chemicals or move things around, you know, my male counterparts would say, you know, you should be taller, and you know, sometimes in jest and so on. However, some of the biggest discriminations really occurred while I was a graduate student, with sort of peer-on-peer engagement. Where people would ask me things like, tell me things like, the only reason that I was there doing a PhD program alongside them was because of affirmative action. I didn't even know what that was, because I literally had just come off the boat and landed in Los Angeles, coming from the University of Chicago. And so this idea that I was let in because of some special sort of enterprise was just not true. And, you know, I graduated top of my class and so on. And, you know, I still am friends with my peers, you know, who've had a change in mind. I've also had other kinds of discriminations in terms of showing up at meetings of the American Chemical Society. and being asked, you know, if I was sure that I was at the right meeting when I had my badge on like everybody else. And so, you know, there are other things that have happened, and, you know, I chalk that up to experience and make sure that I'm taking my experiences to push more students into STEM. Thank you for that question.
Yes. Another question, how can faculty help students who feel that they don't belong in STEM? How can they help them to succeed and stay on course?
That's a really important question. And of course, one of the biggest things that students face is, one of the biggest issues that universities and colleges face right now is this issue of belonging, right? And people think, well, that's a student affairs thing. It's not. It's everybody's business in the academy to ensure that others belong. So there's several different things that can happen. And I can share my PowerPoint later with you all because it speaks to some of those particular issues. Let's talk about it first from the perspective of pedagogy. And for students who are not familiar with that language, pedagogy is the art of teaching. And so the art of teaching is one that says that if good teaching is not occurring, if good learning is not occurring, good teaching is not happening. And what pedagogy has historically done in the STEM disciplines is appear to be elitist in scope, because the disciplines and the academy, higher education, was not really designed with inclusion in mind. And so part of what we've done as a disservice to ourselves as in the STEM disciplines is to create situations to keep people out. And how do we do that? Whether it's intentional or not, there are different types of pedagogies that are in place right now, because over the last 20 years, we've learned a lot more about how people learn. The first and most important thing that has to happen is that as faculty, we have to honor and understand who our constituencies are, who our students are, how they learn, what they want to learn, and what their learning context is. No one to this day, 25 years of school, has ever asked me why I was doing chemistry, ever. And this has nothing to do with, whereas I was in the Caribbean in school, nobody ever asked me anything. I came to the United States, nobody ever asked me why this was something that was interesting to me. In so doing, they would have understood better my motivation for learning, and might have then been able to create different types of things that were peculiar to my learning context in order to keep me motivated and feel as if I belong. So that's just one type of learning motif that can happen, as well as creating community among students.
Great. I think we have time for maybe one quick one that I hate not to pass up. Why should a student study STEM in 2020?
Oh, well, you know, there are two things that I see happening in STEM right now. And I would, if a student asked me that question, you know, what should I really study? Why should I really study STEM? I would point them in two directions. Well, three now. One, global health is the #1 minor in the world. And that's telling me something. And this is even before the pandemic. It's telling me that students, especially our younger generations, newer generations of students, are really very much interested in integrating issues of social justice with whatever it is that they're doing. So you have business majors where global health is the minor. You have pre-law students where global health is the minor, and so on and so forth. You have musicians and music students where global health is a minor. And so there's this integration of social justice and the work that's going on that's driving that. So global health then requires that you understand STEM. And so curricula that I look at that doesn't have a very strong STEM base, but people are interested in medicine and global health and those things, that's not good. So get us a strong STEM base first. The second is information storage. You know, we're generating a ton of information. Where are we going to store it? And so you have to then do engineering or other STEM types of work in order to understand how this particular enterprise will work. And so that is particularly important, and I think will drive the 22nd century. And then the third is aging, right? People are living longer and so on and so forth. If I were to sneak a fourth in, it would be a combination of the ways in which we are doing time travel. And so instead of having to travel to another country, right, we can stay right here and perhaps, you know, walk around the pyramids. And what that's going to require are people who understand STEM, people who understand library studies, people who understand storage, and so on and so forth. So lots and lots of opportunities there.
Great, thank you so much.
Well, we have reached the end of our Convocations. So on behalf of Convocations, I would really like to thank Dr. Richards for a wonderful presentation. I'd like to thank Mary Robert very much for her acting as a moderator, and of course tech support from Mackenzie and Kyle. I hope you can join us again next week when we have a accent convocation with our former director of the Campus Christian Center, Reverend Gail Bowman. And yeah, I wish you a very good night, everyone, and stay safe, and see you next week. Thanks so much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.